Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And Tara Reid came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of three-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky through all the bots and all the noise pollution. So trust us when we tell you that the masking of abuses is perhaps this country's oldest institution. And I know nothing nobler than facing it in honor of the truth when you know that the people holding power have been neutralizing truth since there was wet ink on the Constitution. So know that Tara's truth is something crucial to the movement. And if you see yourself a partner to the revolution, help this country see through all the baseless propaganda through the crux of Joe's illusions. And recognize that Tara Reid gave everything she had so she could tell us what the truth is. Recognize the decent thing to do when someone bares their soul and shows their bruises is not to ask for context or offer up your own solutions. Your job is just to listen with an honest mind and put yourself on Tara's side a moment so you understand the path she chooses. That there is no instant fame worth the dragging of your name. And if that's what you think, you've a lot to learn about the kind of facts the mob can handle and the kind that it refuses. You've a lot to learn about the
co-star Reed. How is everyone tonight? I have a super special guest and I have admired him for a very long time. His name is Jeffrey Ventre, and he has quite a background. He's a medical doctor, but he also, you may have know him also from the movie Blackfish and being a whistleblower regarding SeaWorld. So I'll let Jeffrey talk about that. Welcome, Jeffrey. It's nice to have you.
Thanks, Tara. It's great to be on the show.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have a lot of things in common besides following each other on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
We're both in the Pacific Northwest. We both have a love of the oceans. And I mentioned to you before we came on that I was an intern before I worked for other members of Congress. I worked for Leon Panetta, and the main issue that I was involved with, that I took notes with and went to hearings, was about the Marine Sanctuary Act and protecting the coastline along the California coast and the mammals, the cetaceans that habitat, dolphins and whales, and very close to my heart. So I appreciate all the work that you do. And yeah, if you could tell the audience a little bit about who you are and your journey that led you, to SeaWorld and beyond.
Yeah, back in the 80s when I was going to college, SeaWorld has controlled the narrative basically about what they are and what they do, basically until Blackfish came out and Death of Seaworld. But the media painted a very different picture that SeaWorld helped craft, of them doing a lot of research and so forth. So I attended Florida State University and wanted to have a cool job. I loved animals. I grew up with horses. We used to swim the horses in the lake that we lived on, and I loved large marine mammals. And so with a biology background, I was like, I really don't want to work in a lab somewhere. I thought it would be cool to work with animals in a place where I thought there was more research going on than actually was. And I was from Florida, and ended up being one of a few people that got hired after like a swim test and an interview at SeaWorld in Orlando. And I got to work at the time, there were 4 animal training stadiums there. There was the Shamu Stadium and the Whale and Dolphin Stadium and the Pinniped Stadium, which was sea lions and walruses. And then there was a SeaWorld Theater. And so I had this experience. And when I got in there, I thought that there was going to be a lot more science going on, but really what it was a kind of a marine version of the circus. And we kind of sarcastically refer to SeaWorld as the sea circus. But when you first start working there, you're just kind of so humbled that you got the job. There's like a year or two of a honeymoon phase where you are just stoked, and you're out there doing live public performances and working with these incredible animals. I mean, the first time I got into a water with a killer whale, it was something that I'll never forget. And also swimming with belugas and false killer whales. I spent 7 of my 8 years at SeaWorld working with marine mammals, but then you start to realize that the animals are paying a huge price. For example, 8 years, I did work with Tilikum. He was, over 20 feet long and 12,000 pounds, and the pool that he was in was only 33 feet deep, and that was the show pool. The other pools weren't even as deep as he was long, and so you get to see some of the shortcomings of captivity, especially for free-ranging animals. And if you go to a zoo, which I don't do, you notice the stereotypic behaviors that most large mammals exhibit, like big cats will pace back and forth. Even horses will crib in their stalls. That's a stereotypy.
Weaving, they call it with horses. Yeah, when they weave back and forth. Yeah,
gorillas. And so a lot of these animals are wide ranging, and they just don't do well in captivity. I knew I needed to go back to school. I first became a chiropractor in Portland. That's what got me out to the Pacific Northwest, and practiced in Portland for 3 years. Then I went back to med school, where I became a physical medicine physician. I was in New Orleans doing my residency in 2010 in February, and my former colleague, John Jett, texted me and said, someone's been killed at SeaWorld. And I still knew most of the senior people there, because it takes a while to get to the point where you're doing water work with killer whales and doing the show performances. And that was kind of the level that I was at. And so we were trying to figure out who it might be, and it turned out it was Don Brancho. And so I was in New Orleans. I don't know if you remember in Blackfish, there was a scene from 2006 when Ken Peters got dragged down to the bottom of the pool.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, I got a call regarding that in 2006, and I was still in med school, and I'm like, I'm not going to get involved with this. This is too much of a distraction. You know, I've got to stay.
Oh my
focused.
gosh, you were in med school. That's right. Okay.
Well, fast forward to 2010, I was in residency and at LSU in New Orleans. And so I get a call from the producer of Anderson Cooper's show, because they had my number from before when I said no, and they called back and said, you want to be on AC 360 tonight? And I thought about it. I'm like, it was the same thought process that went through my mind. I said, not really. I don't want to go down this. I don't want to go there. It's, you know, a lot of, because you know what's coming, right? And so you especially know what's coming. And so I talked to Michelle, my significant other. I talked to my sister, and I talked to John Jett, the guy that texted me, and they go, dude, we've been talking about the problems with captivity for a long time. Like, kind of, you have to say something. And so I initially said no to the show producer, and so I missed out on the opportunity to get picked up and brought to the studio in downtown New Orleans. But they did call me, you know, on my iPhone, and we did the interview, and they put pictures on the AC 360 show that night. And I got to say, look, I was worried that there was talk of putting Tilikum down. And I was just saying, it's not the animal's fault. You know, this is an animal that deserves to live, because there was kind of an outcry to put him down. What that did, though, was it alerted the other news, like CBS News, and I started to get, like, it snowballed from that. So I was on CBS Early Show and did a couple shows like that, and then John, the guy that, and anyway, snowballed, and we John Jett and I felt a little bit isolated, and we didn't want to get a lawsuit slapped against us. So we told a couple more trainers and just tried to expand the field, so to speak. There was safety in numbers. And then there was a guy named Tim Zimmerman from Outside Magazine. He was still an author, a journalist, and he wrote a feature piece called Killer in the Pool. And then that got read by Gabriella Cowperthwaite, who's now directing movies and, you know, dramatic films in Hollywood because of Blackfish. And she came to my first Superpod event in San Juan Islands and got most of the interviews there, and then put Blackfish together. And it was well researched. There was an OSHA trial that I was involved with as a witness. And
you were an expert witness for that?
I wasn't. I don't know if I was called an expert witness. I got served, and they didn't call me to the
subpoenaed.
I got subpoenaed while in New Orleans, and I provided a written statement.
Oh, okay.
And I was happy, because I was living in New Orleans. The trial was in Sanford, Florida, so I provided a written testimony and didn't have to be called up onto the stand. But anyway, the trial was in 2 parts. It lasted a week, and then they postponed it and finished it like 6 months later. And then John and I got involved with writing several peer-reviewed scientific pieces on the topic. We wrote about survival. We wrote about the teeth damage that occurs to the whales. We wrote about 2 of the whales that died from West Nile virus and St. Louis virus encephalitis, because they were bitten by mosquitoes, because killer whales in captive environments sit there with their backs above the water pretty much all night long logging, and mosquitoes are attracted to CO2 and black surfaces, so they just get drilled by mosquitoes all night. Especially it was 2 big males, Taku in 2007 and Kanduk in 1990, that were killed by mosquito vectors. So we wrote a scientific paper. We wrote a paper on that. We wrote a paper on the teeth damage that occurs to captive orcas, because like horses or like other animals, they exhibit these stereotypies. And one of the things that they do is they neurotically will like kind of open their mouth and grind their teeth on the concrete corners of the pool. And they will also face off across 2 gates and chomp at each other, like kind of like a threat display. And sometimes they'll knock their teeth off or chip their teeth off.
Oh, wow.
And so the vets then have to come in, and inside of their teeth are shaped like upside down ice cream cones. And when they pop off the tip, it leaves a fleshy pulp that then becomes almost always infected. So the vets come in with a little drill, and they drill out the core of the pulp, the fleshy pulp of the tooth, and then the trainers are asked to flush their teeth out 2 to 3 times a day with a saline betadine type solution. When I was there at SeaWorld in Florida, and we take basically a fancy water pick and push it down into the upside down ice cream cone teeth, and it upwells like fish roe and particles of.
And they allowed you to do this.
They not only allowed us to do it, it kept the animals alive. Because what happens is these fish roe and these bacterial particles get down into the jaw, which is highly vascularized, and then it creates little bacterial implants that travel through the bloodstream. And I think is the main cause of killer whale deaths at SeaWorld, even though they call all of them pneumonia. I think a lot of it is seeded from their teeth.
Right.
You know how sometimes even in human dentistry, if you go to have major teeth work done, they'll sometimes give you Keflex or an antibiotic to prevent you from becoming septic. So the same thing happens with killer whales, but SeaWorld, like all powerful corporations, takes this and spins it into such a way where they say, look at our superior dental care. Killer whales in the wild do not get this type of dental care.
Oh, because they don't need it. It's like it's like wild horses when they talk about hoof care. Wild horses don't need hoof care because they're running down their hooves and whatnot.
Yes. And so
you know what? I wanted to ask if I could, Indy, do you have the clip? Because I wanted the audience to see who hasn't seen just the trailer of Blackfish, so they know what we're referencing. Could you play that for us, Indy? Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so everyone, I want to play the trailer to Blackfish, which is, a lot of what we're talking about here, and the documentary, the very famous documentary. That's.
Yeah.
When you look into their eyes, you know somebody is home.
Okay.
They're an animal that possesses great spiritual power, not to be meddled with.
Orange County Sheriff's Office.
We need SO to respond for a dead person at SeaWorld. A whale has eaten one of the trainers.
Tillicum is the one that went after her.
Dawn is the senior trainer here at Shamu Stadium.
She captured what it means to be a SeaWorld trainer, that it made me realize what happened to her really could have happened to anyone.
I've been expecting somebody to be killed by Tillicum.
We weren't told much about it, other than it was trainer error.
It didn't just happen. It's not a singular event. You have to go back to understand this.
The speedboat herded them in, and they could just pick out the young ones.
This is the worst thing that I've ever done.
When Tillicum arrived at SeaWorld,
He was twice as large as the next animal.
We stored these whales in what we call a module, which was 20 feet across and 30 feet deep, and the lights were all turned out.
Probably led to what I think is a psychosis.
All whales in captivity are all psychologically traumatized. It's not just Tillicum.
If you were in a bathtub for 25 years, don't you think you'd get a little psychotic?
Dawn would tell you that it was her mistake. They blamed her.
It's just a bold-faced lie.
I was just instructed to get rid of the tape.
the industry has a vested interest in spinning these. That sells a lot of Shamu dolls. It sells a lot of tickets at the gate.
There's no record of an orca doing any harm in the wild.
You know that I forgot that it made me cry so much. I think my brother cried in it too. It's a tearjerker.
Yeah.
Even now. Whew. That was a powerful documentary.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to point out that, and so it was released in 2013. It was a lot of fun. did some traveling for the film. But prior to Blackfish was a book written by David Kirby called Death at SeaWorld. And there's a company in London who has a famous director and producers that are putting together a 10-part mini series. I guess, how the streaming platform is becoming the one. And so I don't know if it's been bought yet, but I know that they've actually, written or produced the first 2 or 3 shows. So
is it on, do you know what network or platform?
So I don't think it's been purchased yet. They're hoping for like an HBO Max or a Netflix or whatever like that. But it's something that, if people are into the story of captivity and Don Branchell, Death at SeaWorld is a great book. There's a, it's a long book, so not nearly as many people were exposed to it as Blackfish, because Blackfish has had an amazing run for a documentary. And and so, what Blackfish is 83 minutes, they're going to have, I think, 10 1-hour shows about the Death at SeaWorld thing, and that'll take people a lot more in depth.
It'll be really, really in depth. And good, because that's I think there's a lack of understanding about cetaceans. People don't understand dolphins and whales. First of all, they don't understand they're mammals, but just the incredible intellect of those animals is and we haven't even touched the surface of understanding it, really. And this is my understanding, right?
No, I totally agree. And I'd like to plug Steve Wise in the Non-Human Rights Project. He is an attorney that is trying to win the first habeas corpus suit for a sentient being. It doesn't have to be an orca. It might be Happy the elephant or a chimpanzee. And some of these cases have already run through state court systems, like in New York. And so, hopefully once the first precedent is set with a victorious habeas corpus suit for an animal, then that will hopefully set a precedent for the rest of the 49 states that follow English common law, Louisiana's, I think, French civil law. And so anyway, that will change the game in the same way, in the terrible history of the US, when slaves were once traded as property, that's the status that animals have right now. And so the goal of the Non-Human Rights Project is to show the autonomy, the independence, the sentience of these creatures, that they make decisions for themselves, they grieve, they have emotions like jealousy, they communicate. And so I'm hopeful that Steve
secondary emotions.
Steve and his group will be successful at gaining habeas corpus for a particular animal. And that's something that is ongoing, and it's been going on for many years now. So
it's interesting how our culture, I think it's fueled a bit by capitalism as well. We objectify everything that we use and consume and produce. And so unfortunately, because so many carnivores exist in our, I think in our country, there's just this de-animalization. There's no secondary emotions or acknowledgement. They're just objectified. They're put in crates, like, in factory farms, when they're used for food. And then in the case of, SeaWorld, what was always striking to me, it's funny, I was always put off by it before all I knew, It's funny, because my daughter was little during that time, I was in law school, and I had a chance to go down and take her to SeaWorld, and I chose not to, and I didn't like it. There was something, it just, I think because I had grown up on the coast and had the fortunate ability to see dolphins and whales in the wild in their natural habitat, I couldn't bear to see it in captivity. I couldn't bear it.
Well, you're one of I think one of a minority of special people that just have that sense, can just feel that it's wrong. As a young buck, out of college, I was just wanting to get a cool job working with cool animals. I didn't, you know what I mean? Like that. And you don't think of it along those lines until it kind of hits you in the face.
Well, when did the whale radicalize you? Which one was it? And was it kind of gradual, or was it sudden for you?
Well, I spent time at Shamu Stadium in my first year, and then I went away to the other stadiums. Then when I came back to Shamu Stadium, and it was 94, 95, I was just amazed. Number one, several whales had died. Number two, their teeth are just literally smashed up, and it advances over time. And so that was the teeth thing, and that's why John and I wrote a paper on the teeth damage, because this is something that they can't run from, because we combined forces with Ingrid Visser, who's a well-known New Zealand orca biologist, and she had visited she's visited every captive killer whale facility in the world, and she's really good with the camera. So she had open mouth pictures of all these whales. And so we were able to actually go through and develop a little algorithm to like 0 to 4, how damaged was each tooth, and then quantify all this stuff and say, look, these animals are smashing their teeth at a high rate, and it's ubiquitous in all captive killer whales. And so it was the teeth thing that radicalized me. What really gets me going more now is locally in the Snake River dams. This is something that I would like to introduce on your show, because there's 4 deadbeat dams on the lower Snake River that are essentially taking out the southern resident killer whales, which are the Chinook salmon eating whales that reside off the coast of Washington, Oregon, and California, and also BC, and they go all over the place. But they used to get like 50% of all of their nutrition would be at the mouth of the Columbia River, because the Snake River is a branch of the Columbia, and now there's just no fish left. And on the main stem of the Columbia and the Snake, you've got 8 massive dams, and the 4 on the lower Snake don't have fish passage. So they've set up all these farm fish, fish,
fish farms or hatcheries, you mean?
Hatcheries, sorry.
Hatcheries,
hatchery fish, which is like $1 billion a year. Washington pays like $1 billion a year for its hatchery system. And the hatchery fish are basically clones. They're cousins of, they're not well suited for survival. Their mortality rate is much higher. They don't grow as large. And 100 years ago, if you're a male killer whale trying to survive off the coast of Washington State, you need 300 or 400 pounds a day. And so these animals co-evolved with 100-pound Chinook salmon. Now the average Chinook salmon is only 12.5 pounds. So you can do the energy.
Are you serious?
Yes.
That's huge difference.
It's gigantic. So what, a pregnant whale or a large bull killer whale that requires say 400 pounds of fish a day, get by with catching 4 big fish. Now it's like 30 or 40 big fish. And so they're expending way more energy for a lot less of a payout, and it's changing their behavioral patterns. They used to the reason why Friday Harbor in the San Juan Islands was such an epic spot for killer whales, even just 10 or 20 years ago, is because they had salmon runs that would come into the area and bring the killer whales close to shore. But now there's like nothing there. Or a lot less than there. So the matriarchs of these killer whale societies are taking them north, like up to the Campbell River, or south down to the Klamath River or the Sacramento River, which all have dams on them as well. The bad thing about the Snake River system, though, is that these are run of the river dams, and the propaganda machine to keep these things going talk about them providing flood control, which they do not. In fact, the whole idea of making Lewiston, Idaho a seagoing port is why they were put in there. As a matter of fact, I think that dams were put in as a trade-off by LBJ to the when he was trying to get the Civil Rights Act passed. Like that's where the 4 lower Snake dams got bargained into existence, when the biologists were saying we don't want these dams to begin with. But it was one of these duopoly trades. You'll get a vote for this if you give us this, and they've been a disaster ever since. They create multiple warm inland lakes, and the birth houses in Idaho and so forth that are more resistant to climate change, which would provide great habitat for salmon to be reborn up there, are just cut off. And and so we're literally choking off the food supply to the point where the female southern resident orcas are aborting their fetuses at like a rate of over 2/3, 68% or something like that.
Oh my gosh, that's huge. That's high. That's
gigantic.
That's a very dire sign.
It is a very dire sign. So from a reproductive standpoint, there's some inbreeding going on with the southern residents, because there's just not that much reproductive power going on. And so there's the reason why I bring up the lower snake dams is because it's a critical time right now. There's been a lot of pressure on Jay Inslee and Patty Murray and the Senate. Who's the lady senator from Washington? I can't think of her name. It's Patty Murray, Inslee, and they could basically call for the Army Corps to breach those dams, as written in the 2002 environmental impact statement. Because in that statement, it says the best way to bring back salmon runs to the Northwest is to take out the snake dams. They're costing.
So is there any activism, or is it? Do you feel like it's moving closer to that or further away in our political climate?
So it seems almost unobtainable, but I think finally now people are realizing what's going on. I mean, the salmon is kind of the keystone species for the whole area, for the whole region, almost the West Coast. And the Columbia snake system was historically the largest salmon system in the world. And so, it's ironic, and I've even tweeted at Jay Inslee, ironic that we've got, you've got all these salmon artifacts and statues in Pioneer Square in downtown Seattle.
Oh, sure, and Ballard.
When the policies that you're standing by or perpetuating, the status quo policies, are leading to the extinction of this very iconic species. And it's taking the southern resident whales with them. Now, just to add one thing, there's multiple cultures or ecotypes of killer whales, and there are Biggs transient whales that eat seals and stellar sea lions and so on and so forth. That's a different population. That's like, if you wanted to break it into different European clans, like the southern residents have different teeth. They've got different gastric acids for digesting fish. They're fishermen. The southern resident whales can be thought of as the fishermen of the orca community, whereas like the Biggs transients are more the ones that you see going after like blue whales or large pinnipeds or something like that. They're more approached by stealth, drown your prey. They've got bigger teeth. The composition of the pods tends to be a little bit different, but they're a different group. What we're talking about with the southern residents is the original Shamu was a southern resident, the one that SeaWorld collected after Namu in 1966. So John and I found in our paper that the whales, I guess you would say the average lifespan, it's gotten better over time, but it's still like less than 20 years. Whereas in the wild, you got orcas that have lived to be over 100. So it's a striking difference.
That is a striking difference. I didn't realize, and I think most people in our audience that aren't familiar may not realize all the different types of orcas as well. And, could you speak, because, at the beginning of the show, Indy played for us some whale sounds that we heard and the language. Did you study any of that, or the communication style of the whales and their communication? It's so magical sounding.
It really is. So and this is easily searchable by anybody out in the audience, to go to, I would say, the Center for Whale Research or Seattle hydrophone systems. I mean, they've placed hydrophones out there that you can listen to in real time. And scientists like Paul Spong up in BC has studied the languages. Now, I don't know exactly if they've broken it down to the degree where they understand what they're saying, but they definitely have patterns, and they can associate different patterns with different behaviors and make some implications from that, so what they think is going on. I haven't studied it myself, but I will tell you that each clan or each grouping has its own its own language, basically, and they sound completely different, like offshores compared to transients compared to resident whales, like completely different. And they're striking the difference.
Did you notice any communication difference now that you know more, kind of collectively with the whales in captivity and how they communicated to the ones in the wild?
Well,
was there were they quieter? Were they louder? Anything?
Well, so I think like the intensity of their vocalizations was probably very similar, based on what I've heard come over the hydrophone systems that I've listened to. I've in fact, if I can email you some whale sounds if you'd like.
I love that.
Yeah. But it sounds remarkably like the same, similar, but you can definitely tell different dialects from different communities for sure. I mean,
I was just wondering if something about being in captivity would have limited the language or changed it in some way, and it'd be interesting to know, like if it altered, because if it alters other behavior, then I would assume communication would be part of that.
Probably one thing that people, and this is one of the criticisms that I've stated a few times, is people also don't realize that beginning with Kalina, the very first baby shamu, who was born in September of 1985. Her father, I believe, was Winston, who was a Southern resident, and Katina, who was an Icelandic. So SeaWorld has been breeding hybrids the whole time that have no conservational value. SeaWorld acts like we're breeding these things so we can one day go back and restock. You know, they kind of at least imply that by their research. So these animals don't have a natal pod to go back to, so to speak. In fact, I don't know that there's any, except maybe for Katina. I would say in the SeaWorld collection is all complete hybrids. Southern resident mixed with, they had a transient in there for a while, Kanduk, and he produced Taima, who had a baby. So there's this lineages from different ecotypes that have been mixed and matched. And so I don't know if any of their language patterns are genetic or not, but I think the animals, when they're grouped together, certainly develop their own kind of way to communicate with each other in the situation that they're in.
Well, you know what? Hey, Indy, I was wondering, is there anyone in the chat that has a question for Jeffrey right now, or anything you want to read from the chat?
Well, let's see. We have Reef being dirty, of course, and being silly. So we love Reef. Hi, Reef. We love you, Reef. He was making a whale joke. Of course, a mammal joke. We love him. I don't want to be that dirty on stream. Okay. Then we have Heidi Healer says, this is an amazing yet very heartbreaking interview, and Blackfish. Thank you, Tar and Jeffrey. And then we also have, and I'll put this up, Flash Flood Area 3 said, I had no idea there were different types of orca, as well as that their grandparents once sent away for a record called Sounds of the Sea, expecting sounds of the seashore, but to their surprise and amusement, it was whale songs.
Nice. Yeah, beautiful.
That is nice. One of the things that has come to international attention is just like Blackfish started this movement of people being aware of the damage done to these magnificent, beings. And so it's had an international effect. Have you noticed that some of the European countries have complied and looked to sanctuaries rather than captivity and aquariums like that? Or is there still, kind of the same numbers?
I mean, France has since, I think, since the Blackfish Effect, as it's been called, in fact, I created that term, has ended future captivity, I think the whales that are still there are grandfathered in, so to speak. Canada has done the same thing, and the UK got rid of its his pools a long time ago. I think that's one reason why there's so many UK visitors to SeaWorld in Florida. They don't have it in the UK. But along those lines, I think Europe was ahead of the United States. We've still got lots of captive facilities. I do host an event that was going every year for when Blackfish, the first 4 years, and then it was alternating years after that, called Superpod. Our Superpod 7 was supposed to be in Friday Harbor in 2020, and then COVID-19 happened, so it got canceled. And so we're hopeful to have that event now in Tarifa, Spain, which is at the southern tip of Spain, very near Gibraltar. And one of the reasons why we're hopeful to do that is because Spain has the most captive facilities in Europe. And so there's a lot of push in that area from activists to try to get Spain to follow along with France and Canada and the UK. And, of course, bullfighting is still, available in Spain and so on and so forth. And so apparently in Tarifa, you can get on if anyone wants to go, it's the event, you got to get there, obviously, but the event has always been free. It's near Gibraltar. It's also like a 50-minute ferry ride to Morocco. I've never been to Africa.
Oh, Morocco's great. I've been there. You like it.
Yeah.
You like it. And I would suggest that if you get a chance to go to the desert and camp, you know, in the tents. The stars are amazing in North Africa. So like, it's just, you know, have you ever read the book, The Little Prince?
No.
Yeah, it's like they describe the stars. It feels like the stars are on top of you. It's one of those, it's a really interesting experience. But yeah, Morocco's fun. Morocco's a good time. So check it out.
I've been to Burning Man a bunch of times, and it's kind of similar feeling out there in the Black Rock Desert.
And Spain is beautiful. You know, like yeah, that sounds like a wonderful conference. And then what is the goal of that conference, of your get together this coming in Spain?
It certainly isn't written in stone yet, because we are still navigating post-COVID. In fact, we had this event set up to go in Friday Harbor in 2020 and kind of canceled just 3 or 4 months before it happened. Then we were in, you know, the mask mandates and so forth have been so kind of spastic here in the United States. You know, having an event that attracts people from New Zealand and Australia and Europe to come on something that may or may not happen. We haven't been able to have it yet. So we're hopeful by 2020, it'll either be late next summer or maybe May of 2024 is when we're targeting. And so what happens is you get kind of the activist community combining with the scientific community, combining with the general public, just to really educate people on what the hell's going on. And one of the reasons that's attracted to Spain, I don't know if you guys know about the, or if your audience knows about that group of killer whales that's been disabling sailboats off the coast of Gibraltar, through the Gibraltar Straits. They've disabled like 30 sailboats. And one guy wrote an article because somebody harpooned one of them. That's what the guy claimed. Now, I don't know if that's true. But there was an article written that made the claim, like, these whales are pissed. So
maybe they're territorial. They're a group of,
or maybe they're just curious and want to disable boats. I don't
gotten
really
overzealous. Yeah, could be.
Yeah, but up until like a couple of years ago, there had been really not a whole long record of orcas really.
You know, do you feel like in the human consciousness that there will be, as we move forward, a shift in how we relate to other sentient beings? In other words, like, I mean, I'm just hopeful. Maybe it's naive, but I'm hopeful that there's a gradual shift with the new generation coming up, especially, and a movement, you know, towards plant-based diets.
I told one of the impacts that Blackfish has had on me is it's changed how I shop. It's changed my feelings on factory farms, on factory fishing, and I shop locally. I eat 99% plant-based, unless like my mom has made something and I'm home for Christmas, and you know, stuff along those lines. I'm striving for veganism, but you know, there's times where people just make food and I'll share that with them. But it's shopping locally and getting away from, you know, buying oranges, you know, grown in Brazil, and there's some growing at my parents' house. You know, it's opened my eyes in a lot of ways, and I think that's what you're talking about. Kind of an awakening that maybe you had a long time ago, as the young mom that didn't want to take your daughter to SeaWorld back in the day. You know what I mean? I think if we don't make it to that point, we're doomed. And I'm intrinsically an optimist, and I don't see that the modern society, with the craziness that feels like it's getting crazier, not less crazy, is going to make it much longer in a state of what I'll call just business as usual. I don't see how we can continue to choke our rivers and create these microplastics and dump all our crap, or I don't know if I'm allowed to say shit in the ocean, but we're messing things up on an industrial scale. And okay,
you can.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. I'm hopeful, but you know, I don't know what to think.
Well, I mean, you're taking a lot of active steps to try to conserve and educate and make people aware. And you'd mentioned a book earlier, and the Death
of SeaWorld.
The Death of SeaWorld, yeah. And so that's available for our audience to get online.
Yeah, Death at SeaWorld was written 10 years ago, and it preceded Blackfish. If people are interested in the Blackfish kind of story, they saw the movie. This is 500 pages of it. So it's a lot more, you know, how there's some, I mean, I'm not going to say the book is better than Blackfish did amazing. It's a good book. It's got a lot more of the background story on Tillicum. my story is a part of the book. Naomi Rose, some of the trainers that I worked with, and then the whole plight of the whales is in there as well. And
right now, what's the biggest existential threat in your opinion to the larger mammals in the oceans and the cetaceans?
So the way that we're changing the chemistry of the ocean, and when I say chemistry, I'm specifically referring to the pH. The ocean is analogous, to use like a medical analogy, is almost like the blood of the planet. Okay. And there's a very narrow range of, like, when you if your blood becomes acidic, you start breathing heavier to exhale carbon dioxide. Well, all that CO2 that is accumulating in our atmosphere, most of it is going into the ocean as carbonic acid. And that's why little sea critters are having a hard time making shells. And that's why, in addition to reefs that are getting bleached by hot temperatures, we've already lost, I think, half the phytoplankton in the ocean. So by changing the chemistry just a very small amount, we're having huge impacts that are, combining forces with overfishing and plastics and stuff like that. So really, it's like, what is it that's saying? If the ocean dies, we die. And and so preserving it it's almost like we humans look out at an ocean and it seems like it goes on forever, and we feel like we're not having an impact on it. It's a perfect way for me to also say, I mean, look at the BP oil spill. When I was down in, I did my residency in New Orleans, but I went to a hospital in Houma, Louisiana, which is a little fishing village, Cajun fishing village on the coast. And the type of medicine that I do, physical medicine and rehab, I do EMG tests. I test nerves and I do exams and so forth. But I would do a lot of electromyography or electro nerve studies on fishermen, because they were always getting carpal tunnel. And they were they were telling me horrific stories that wasn't getting reported, because this is when Barack Obama was the president. He's talking about all these dispersants that they were using. Well, the dispersants were having, a lot of the fishermen thought, a worse impact on the in the Gulf of Mexico than even the oil itself. I'm not saying it was a tragedy all around, but they would be dragging their shrimp boats through water, and when the density of the water would change because they'd hit like a patch of dispersants, that sometimes it would like rip the booms off their fishing boats. And a lot of this stuff never even got reported. And these are huge, with the big arms on them and stuff like that. And they'd be cruising along, just, break these boats apart. And I think that's been way underreported, the impacts that the BP oil spill has had. And along those lines, the testing that they have to do to find oil, deep sea oil reserves, they use blasting and seismic testing to find those. And that seismic testing is basically destroying. That's attributing to a lot of the strandings that you're seeing. That and ultrasonar used by navies. The pings are so loud. I think Ken Balcomb described when he was down in the Bahamas he was in at the Center for Whale Research, saw a Navy frigate come through. They had the hydrophones out. They could hear this frigate pinging away, and a bunch of whales beaked whales, and like they took them in and like examined their brains. And I think their brains were like partially like liquefied, because brains aren't that dense anyway. They're kind of, if you've ever, as a doctor, and I've had a couple of brains in my hand, they're pretty jello-like to begin with. But you send a high frequency, I guess a large amplitude wave like that through a melon of a killer whale, it just wreaks havoc on their brains. And and at lesser degrees it causes strandings, and if it's intense enough, can actually cause parts of the brain to kind of liquefy a little bit.
Oh, that's just so awful. And I know there has been some publicity about trying to get the Navy to stop, or other military, but I don't know, in our current environment, since we're the United States of Raytheon right now.
Exactly.
It's hard to know if anyone's paying attention to the earth and the ocean and all the creatures that are on it. Yeah. But to leave our audience with something that they can do, like what are some organizations that are doing some action-based activism or conservation, or, if somebody wants to get involved?
Yeah.
I'm sorry? Oh, sure. Go ahead, Indy. What do you got? What do you got?
So we've got some more chats. So I wanted to shout out Vegan Succubus, vegan friend of the channel, friend of Tara's. She says, "Good evening, happy you love from Washington State. Blackfish is an excellent documentary, and so is The Cove. This is an interesting conversation. If you heard for sentient beings in the ocean, she recommends checking out Earthlings and speciesism. She grew up in a family that loved to fish and crab, but would never eat them. It always felt morally wrong to steal from the ocean, just couldn't do it." Then says, "This is a phenomenal conversation. So glad you're talking about this. Congratulations to both of you for leaning more plant-based. She's been vegan since July 2014, then never looking back." So definitely wanted to shout out Vegan. She's a big fan and friend. Then we also have Human Love Solidarity, and actually I can show some of these chats up, that the plant-based treaty equals to promote a shift to healthier, sustainable plant-based diets. Just kind of explaining that a little deeper. Gosh, there's so many. Wow. People who, here we go. I'm not surprised. Wondering if you know how soon it is predicted to occur that salmon are going extinct.
That's a good question. I think they've even changed the definition. You know how they changed the definition of a vaccine recently? I think they changed the definition of a because they're starting to get mixing between the hatchery fish and the wild fish, and it's kind of creating a blend. And so I think they've changed it to a native. They came up with a new word for it. But that said, the salmon are in trouble, and I point anyone to the Center for Whale Research, to the hashtag, just hashtag free the snake, and you'll find a bunch of accounts. That's one word. It means free the snake river. Free the snake online is a hashtag. Will bring people to some really great activists that are doing work both online and in the real world. There's a Free the Snake event every year. It happens at Lower Granite Dam. Typically it's moved around a little bit, so it could be anywhere in the Snake River. I've attended it twice, and you paddle around and you hear people talk about it. It usually happens in the summertime. Lower Granite Dam is near Pullman, Washington, and you can make a weekend out of it. It's really amazing terrain. One of the sad things, I once drove the length. Last year I was going to buy a silo because I wanted to make a little dwelling out of a silo. But so I drove to Idaho and followed the Snake River the whole way. I didn't see one fisherman for 8 hours of driving on the Snake River. This used to be the most plentiful salmon river in the world, arguably. And it's just been what the dams have done is create a series of dead hot lakes. And a lot of people don't know this, but salmon smolts didn't used to have to expend energy to get to the ocean. It was the current from the river that took them all the way. It just took them. Yeah. And so a lot of times when you see videos of salmon smolt getting swept away where the river is faster, they're not trying to get swept away. They're just getting carried out to the ocean. And when you put these large dams, the depth change when they go down and get pushed through a turbine, it's like a 100-foot depth change. And so a lot of them die from the bends. I think if you count the mortality of each dam has a 12% mortality on a particular population of salmon, and that includes them getting picked off because they're tired and the birds are getting them, or because they're experiencing the bends when they go through one of these large dams or whatever. And then there's 8 main stem dams on the Columbia Snake System. So the math isn't even, they can't make it without having the hatchery fish and people, driving them around in some cases to put them back in behind these dams. It's really a sad state.
That actually leads to Reese's question, which is how do you think sustainable fishing and fish farming will help save the whale's food supply, if so?
Well, fish farming is actually, I think, by whale community is a detriment, because you got these Norwegian and Swedish companies that have these large Atlantic salmon fish farms. And when you, just like for humans, when you congregate a lot of people on like a cruise boat, when you get outbreaks, well, there's outbreaks that occur all the time in these salmon farms, because the fish are just sitting in these open sea pens, and their pellet foods just dropping out of the sky. And there's something called, I think it's salmon leukemia. There's a bunch of cancers that have come out of this, just because when you've got a bunch of large critters in close proximity, it gives bacteria and disease processes like a petri dish opportunity to just spread. And then you have cuts in the net, and you get these fish getting out into the open ocean, and then infecting wild populations. So I think salmon farming, fish farming, is considered a detriment to wild salmon populations.
Well, hopefully, some of these actions, like particularly what you talked about with the dams, will, there'll be some action-oriented legislation to stop, because it seems useless, and all it's doing is harm. So it's antiquated. So
it is. When you look at some of the connections, though, I mean, I want to be very careful with my words here. I think, like Patty Murray has been a longtime senator of Washington. She's a Democratic senator. For some reason, I want to say that her husband is affiliated with like Bonneville Power. You know what I mean? There's these weird bureaucratic connections that keep the status quo going, because there's a small group of people that are harvesting the profits off of these things, even though the 4 snake dams are losing like $105 million a year, because they're having to sell a lot of their power to California at a loss. Because because of wind and solar now, the price of power has gone down. And unfortunately, with dams, they only really produce at a time when you don't need them. When you need energy in the summertime to operate air conditioners, and in the wintertime to operate heaters. Well, dams are giving you power in the spring, and that's the time where you need the least power.
Right.
And so
that's
we don't.
So interesting.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And, well, you have, in the Pacific Northwest, there are a lot of people who are very committed to, environmental causes. But one thing that happened, I'm sorry, my cat visited me. He heard your voice, and he has things to say about the whales. But he came up on my lap during the middle of this, so it's okay. Yeah. But what I was going to say is that, what's amazing is just that I feel like there's been sort of a mindset where people are trying to move towards, saving and being more, but you have these elites in office, and I know you don't want to address that, but I have no problem addressing it, that are basically just, they're just into the profits that they can make, and the access to power that they can keep by these relationships. Like, I don't know if you've noticed on my Twitter, I'm very loud about wild horses and about the way they're being slaughtered, and we're losing bloodlines of wild horses that have been around, for centuries, actually, because now they know that they came, across, they weren't here. Yeah. So they're native, and the wild horses are being lost to slaughter, and BLM, which is the Bureau of Land Management, has been mismanaging it. And one of the things that I came across, and I don't know if you did in my activism work, is the Cattlemen's Association just fought and lobbied Washington so deeply, and the members of Congress, that they still haven't passed the slaughter, even though a majority of people do not want horse slaughter, and we don't even eat horse meat in this country. There's still, this movement. So did you run into that kind of lobbying force, where there was like one kind of group that just
yeah, I mean, really, SeaWorld itself is a gigantic billion-dollar company.
That's a private corporation. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, as you know, as a whistleblower, you just get pounded. I mean, they make shit up. They say whatever they want. They're just trying to discredit any of the messengers that come out and just start saying, "Hey, look, I've got video. Here, what do you need here?"
Yeah.
But that's the nature of our political system, that is so thoroughly corrupted, as you know, and it's really a sad state, because was that Princeton study in 2012, I think it was, that said, we're no longer a democracy or even a representative republic here in the United States. It's the common person like us, only if we band together, which is why we're talking together. It's to kind of organize a little bit, use our lever of power, which is probably our labor. I mean, that's probably what it comes down to is our labor. But yeah, I've run up against SeaWorld, and just in the activism in Washington State, I went over both on a conference call and to this Olympia, the state capitol, with a group of experts, including a guy that was a retired Army Corps of Engineer guy that did the 2002 study on the lower Snake dams and said we need to breach them. I've met with Inslee's science team, and I felt like the guys that I was with just knew way more than the guys, the science team of the governor, and it was really disappointing to see, because you can pick up that,
and you wonder if that's purposeful.
I mean, these guys are good at like deflecting and not giving you an answer, but they really seem like less educated than the experts that I happen to be hanging out with, who were scientists that have studied this. And so our political, it's sad. I mean, and we're not getting
so even whales become politicized amazingly. Saving whales.
Yeah, Inslee had this Orca task force, and it was a sham. Basically, they're just kicking the can. Let's do more studies. They've been studying this for a long time, and nothing ever gets done.
Well, you're doing something, and to the audience out there, how can they find you, and where can they ask you questions? What's your Twitter handle and whatnot?
My Twitter handle is my name, Jeffrey_Ventre. That's it. I've written a few scientific papers with John Jett. Those can be found by putting in John Jett, Jeffrey Ventre. I have written probably 100 blogs at Voice of the Orcas website. I host this Superpod event. There's probably a lot of stuff on
well, everyone's got to make it to Spain. Let's go.
Yeah, I think it's Talifa. I think it's Talifa. I've never been there.
Okay.
But I have looked at it on a map, and it's close to Gibraltar, and I've never been there. So yeah, it'd be great to see you there, Tara, and whoever else is there. I'll keep you posted, because now that we're connected, I'll let you know if this is going to happen. I think it will, but I don't want to. Who knows if World War III starts or some shit like that.
Let's hope not. I know. Well, at the humans, we're not doing the greatest right now with our, but hopefully, I just think that conversations like this lead to other conversations and other people researching and getting involved, and also, younger people getting involved, which is what we need. We need, like, my daughter is in college right now, and she has her passions and her activism, and that's all important, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so I appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you being here. I've like I said, I've admired your work for a very long time. And I mentioned to you that I have an admiration also for those folks at Sea Shepherd that do their bits, and have communicated with them before. And I like to see that there's been you were part of an international movement that really helped whales and other mammals, like dolphins and so on, because it affected them as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So hopefully people are more aware, and I think too, I had the privilege of growing up in an area where I could walk out onto a beach and we'd see the wild dolphins. Like, I would time it, like my walk, the dolphins would come in the morning and they would go at night, and the whales sometimes would be out in the distance. And I don't care how many times you see it, but everyone on the beach just stops and stares at the whales. And it's just the silence that comes over, because it's so beautiful to watch. And if you're on up on the upper cliffs, which I used to watch from too, it's even more spectacular. And I think that appreciation kind of helped develop, my appreciation.
For sure. And that's
for the wild.
That sense of not going to SeaWorld back in the day, for sure.
I just can't imagine. Now, one last question I wanted to ask you, and that's about aquariums, because there's the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which
I think
could you talk a little bit about aquariums?
Well, so I've never been to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, but I know that it's been used as an example of the right way to do things. And so I don't know if that's changed. I think I'm not sure because I haven't done it myself, but like I think they put out apps that tell you fish that have been caught sustainably and try to be more responsible. I don't believe they have any marine mammals. I think it's mainly, is that true? I think it's just
that's true. I've been a lot, and they're very science oriented, very research based, or so they say, but you would know better than me how, if that protocol is really followed. As far as like, it does ignite younger people that are, you know, for their interest in the ocean and maybe science, and it definitely ignites that spirit. I still saw sharks in enclosed tanks, and I don't even like to see sharks. Like it just seemed like too small of a space.
Just to chime in, I'm not an aquarium or a zoo goer. And so maybe there's a continuum of some that do it better than other, but I personally won't be visiting the Monterey Bay Aquarium, but you know, maybe some are better than others.
They take in usually like when it's the sea lions or like the, you know, otter or whatever they do, it's usually ones that are rescued or there's some sort of issue or health issue. And then they study like what's causing, like sometimes there's a bacterial or there's something in the ocean that's causing it, and it's revealed some pollution or something. The other positive thing I've seen from them is, like you mentioned, the sustainability guide. They are really on the restaurants because there's a ton of seafood restaurants. The cannery used to be there. It's shut down in Monterey, as you know. But there's a ton of restaurants that continually try to feed the tourists. And so they're very, you know, active with trying to get them on board with sustainable menus and not, you know, and, you know, I don't know to what level of success, but what I would say is that, I'm not an aquarium person either. I just can't. I just can't. It's still a tank, no matter how deep it is.
Exactly.
Right? With glass sides.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And to everyone out there, if, you know, follow Jeffrey on Twitter and, you know, go to Spain. I'm going to try to go.
Talifa,
And if you haven't seen Blackfish, please do watch it or read the book. So, so thank you again, Jeffrey.
Yeah. Thanks, Tara.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Take care.
Thanks, Tara.
Thank you. Our mics are cold or hot?